some people said they couldn't hear the music, so I'm gonna replay it from YouTube. So hold on for a second.
We're the Kellys.
Sleep.
Our dream is to protect our baby's future.
When it comes to parenting, the unknowns keep us up at night.
Hi, I'm the Kelly State Farm agent. Here to...
Can you see the screen? All right, hold on. You will soon. Do you see?
We see it now,
It's a song called Terrify Me.
You talking to me because you're
You got the money and you got your own jail. Yeah, you come to terrify me. You own the judge that would deny me my bail. Well, look out, you try to terrify me. You use eminent domain to take my house. What? You come to terrify me. From the Brooklyn, Atlantic yards, the Northwest, East, and South. You come to terrify me. Well, I go higher, 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 higher. Won't bow down. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I won't bow down. I won't bow down. I won't bow down. I won't bow down. Yeah, 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 yeah. Corporations making a mess of elected officials. Well, you try to terrify me. They confuse and abuse all of the important issues. But now you try to terrify me. Oh, well, 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 good people got a right to say no. You can't terrify me. Well, good people got a right to say so. Stop trying to terrify me. Well, I go higher, 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 higher. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I go higher, 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 higher. Oh, bow. Yeah. Yeah.
So does this scene look familiar to you?
So how is everybody today?
Like this every weekend. You need to ask yourself
I'm
this
trying
question.
to.
Are you missing out on the big...
Okay, here we go. I love it. All right, I'm gonna put my headphones in. All right, can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Yay, okay. I apologize for the technical difficulties. That's what happens when you try to do stuff that you don't know anything about. So how is everyone? Welcome, welcome. So welcome to Arts Build's weekly Zoom. And oh, I feel like I have a echo. Do y'all hear an echo?
Yes.
All right, I'm gonna take the headphones off. Is that better now?
Yes.
All right, good. All right. Well, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to Arts Build's weekly Zoom. We wanted to start it out with some music to get everybody thinking and pumped up on this Friday morning. As you know, Arts Build, we're a grant maker. We do leadership programs, arts advocacy, and we work to be a hub and a convener for the arts community. So we know that racial equity is definitely one of the challenges in our community and also in the local arts community. And what we're hoping today is to create a space for learning and thinking, introspection, and greater understanding about issues of racial equity in our city. We acknowledge that everyone is learning, and at the same time, we can also acknowledge that many of us are tired of waiting. I just want to remind everyone to take time and mute yourself, and if you want to speak or ask a question or make a comment, unmute. Use the chat box. And someone asked for the YouTube link for that performance. I'm gonna put it in there. If I don't put it in, I will definitely email it to you in the follow-up link or in the follow-up email. Throughout this, we're gonna have a couple of people coming on to do some readings for us and share. And I want to thank everyone who sent artwork and images. We'll be using those throughout this discussion to kind of pause and give time for reflection and conversation. I've also included some interpretations of the US flag by Black and Latinx and Indigenous artists too. So you'll see those as we go through. Just some upfront things. For some of this, it's going to feel like it's not enough. And for some people, things and concepts that we share might be overwhelming. For some people, it's not going to go deep enough or give the release or comfort that they need right now. But for some of us, it will be challenging and uncomfortable. As we go through this and into the future, we want you to really tell us how Arts Build can be a better leader and convener on this topic of racial justice. And we're working on doing further training addressing this issue. And we haven't forgotten how earlier, before the pandemic, we talked about doing some convenings to help grow networks and grow audiences for some of our organizations that we serve. I also invite you to take a look at our mapping project, which we released this week. That project is one that we just recently completed, and we're using that to really take a deep look at where Arts Build resources have gone in the past, looking at the history of our organization. And we're looking at it too as a way to dig deeper and be more intentional about the neighborhoods and the communities that our organization has overlooked in the past. We're going to put some energy toward getting into those neighborhoods and meeting people, and partnerships and new constituents. Just a reminder again, if you are on, if you could just mute your mic so that we can hear, and please unmute anytime you want to jump in. So I'm here to learn too, and I'm here to look deeply at Arts Build's history and work, continue to work with our board and staff to really help us realize our mission and more fully serve our community. So what I would like to do now is have one of our local poets, Mr. Marcus Ellsworth, if he's on the line, to read this beautiful poem by Langston Hughes.
I'm here.
Away.
Harlem by Langston Hughes. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode?
So I want to turn it over to my good friend Sarah, who's going to lead our discussion today. And you may know her from around town. She's affiliated with Bridge Community Church. She does work with an organization called Dismantling Racism, and she's doing amazing things now as one of the leaders of Caleb, which is an organization that is working for justice throughout Chattanooga and Hamilton County. So I'm going to go mute and I'm going to ask Sarah to take it away, and I'll do the slides for you, Sarah.
Thank you, James. All right, so yes, my name is Sarah. I am originally from Texas. Born in El Paso, Texas, third generation Mexican American. Hopefully you cannot, can you hear my text messages in the background? I feel like you can. That's my Latino family texting. So yes, so I was born in El Paso, Texas, and spent most of my growing up years in the DFW, Dallas-Fort Worth area. I like to identify as a Latina, a Chicana, and a Mexican American. So a little bit about my household. I grew up in a household that spoke Spanglish, which is basically a mix of English and Spanish. My grandparents never learned English, and so they spoke Spanish to me, and I spoke Spanglish to them. Yeah, so I went to a white private school growing up in my elementary years, and I was the only Latina girl at that time, and really learned to navigate a space where I was the minority. And so I can only have that language now as I begin to explore my own ethnicity and my own story and become kind of self-aware of where I am and kind of the race history of our country. I am a light-skinned Latina, and I'm a citizen. I speak English, and so I carry quite a bit of privileges. And so during my time, during my race journey, I've had to kind of explore that and also come to terms with my own anti-Blackness that I carried, my own prejudice that my community carries. And so I say all that to try to just give you kind of model what it looks like to be self-aware of your story. And so we moved here, my husband and my 3 kids. I have a 10-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 7-year-old. We moved here to Chattanooga about 4 years ago to do race equity work, racial justice work. And I created a program called ARC, Dismantling Racism, where we offer trainings for organizations to basically explore racism within yourself and within your organization, and to learn and grow in this journey. And so, yeah, that's a little bit of me. I know some of you, but there's lots on here that I don't know. I actually don't know how to turn off my text messages, so that's just gonna have to ding. All right, so to start us off, I think it's important to kind of lay down a couple of rules of engagement as we begin this conversation. The first one is easy, but hard. It's an easy thing to say, but a hard thing to do is listen. We want to hear what other people are sharing and be open to perspectives and experiences that are different from ours. And the second one that is probably really important, and if you begin this journey, it will not be the last time you're uncomfortable, but is to embrace discomfort. So we expect to experience discomfort in this conversation. You should expect to experience discomfort as you begin to ask yourself questions about your life, about your institutions and your programs. And we think that tension provides room for growth. So hopefully for some of you that are new to the conversation, you'll lean into that and allow it to help you grow. The second thing that is pretty important, I feel like, is creating a shared language. So oftentimes when we start conversations about race and racism, for people that are Black, Latinx, and people of color, it can be difficult because there's an experience that they have and an understanding and a framework for racism. But for the other side, that is not always there. So it's so important that we create shared language. We lack shared language and framework for thinking, talking, and understanding about race and racism. So defining terms helps us describe the world and our place in it. It gives us an opportunity to challenge our miseducation about racism and how it works, and it lays a really solid foundation. Racism conversations can be emotional and politically charged, and so it's just important that we kind of understand each other when we're having these conversations. So the first one is prejudice. It is a learned prejudgment based on stereotypes about social groups that someone belongs to. Prejudice occurs at the individual level. All humans have learned prejudice. They can consist of thoughts and feelings, assumptions, maybe attitudes or generalizations. So if you think of prejudice on a spectrum, here we might have hatred. So prejudice is not just about hatred, but is a spectrum of things. So it can be discomfort or lack of interest. And so all those things, thoughts, feelings, attitudes, assumptions, kind of lay in this spectrum within prejudice. We learn our prejudice from the society around us, from the messages received, whether it's through media or through our family. And oftentimes we learn our prejudice through the absence of misinformation. So if we think about the way that we learned history growing up, and if you started to read books on our history of racism, I'm pretty sure you think to yourself, I never heard this in school. I went to college, I never heard this in college. And so sometimes our prejudice can be learned through the absence of information or people groups that are in our kind of sphere, which really kind of gives an implicit message that groups are not important when they're absent from us. And also we get our prejudice from our segregated lives. Oftentimes we're not around each other. Our schools are segregated, our social spaces are segregated, our neighborhoods are segregated, and so those can really be places where we can get ideas about people. Here we have racism. So I think an easy definition to describe racism is our prejudice plus power equals racism. So we want to think of racism as a system that includes economic, political, social, cultural structures, its actions and beliefs that institutionalize and perpetuate unequal distribution of privileges, resources, and power between white people and people of color. This system is historic, it is normalized, and it's taken for granted. It's deeply embedded and works to the benefit of whites and to the disadvantage of people of color. So racial prejudice plus social and institutional power equal racism. It's more than just an individual or personal level, and it's not limited to a single act or person. And so it's just really important that as we begin to understand racism and the complexity, racism is multidimensional and it's complex, which is why it has a pretty hefty definition of it when we're thinking about it. And I do want to point out that when we're thinking about prejudice and racism and the difference, when we're talking about Black and people of color, they can definitely hold prejudice. and discriminate against white people, but they don't hold the social and institutional power to back up that prejudice. And the impact that a Black person can have on a white person is temporary and contextualized. And so it's really important that we understand how power plays into racism. Robin DiAngelo says that racism is a system and not an event. I would encourage you to look her up if you haven't heard of her. She wrote an amazing book called White Fragility, and has a couple other books as well. But yeah, racism is a system and it's not an event. I found this great graphic from Dr. Shakti Butler. She's an educator, anti-racism educator out of California. And she really wanted to give a picture of this very complex, multi-dimensional thing that we have in our society called racism. So if you want to take a minute and with your finger, go and kind of trace out the outline of that cycle. So we have the internal side, which is our bias, our privilege, and our internalized racism. And then that plays into our external lives. That is the interpersonal, institutional, and structurals that we have in our society. And we have kind of history playing a part here. We have culture, and we have identity. And then if you'll see in the middle, we have power and economics. And so power and economics fuel this cycle. And so I'm sure as you begin to kind of grow your capacity and your literacy in talking and understanding about racism and being able to see it within yourself and within your institutions, you'll see how this all plays out and how important power and economics are to how racism operates, and then how we're also going to dismantle racism. So we have some statistics that are not encouraging, and this comes from a fantastic Ben & Jerry article. And I don't know if you've seen their statements and stuff, but they're on point right now. But they kind of broke out some of the systems that we have in our society, and then just kind of the inequalities. So racism is at every level of society. It's in our criminal justice system. So Black people make up 13% of the general population, but 40% of the prison population, which is just astounding. Employment for African Americans are as likely to be unemployed by 2 times. 67% of healthcare. One study found that of doctors have a bias against African American patients. And I'd also throw out and encourage you to even research infant mortality and the difference within healthcare systems for African American women that are having babies. For surveillance, we have Black drivers are 30% more likely to be pulled over. For housing, Black people are shown 18% have fewer homes and 4% fewer rental units than white people. For wealth, we have, you can see the difference between, for white African Americans, and so that's 90% of wealth, and then you see how low the rest of that is. And so then education is 3 times. Black students are more likely to be suspended than white students for the same infractions. Yeah, it's national, somebody's asking. We can definitely add that link to the article as well so that you can read through that. This is where I'd like for you guys to have a little bit of input and maybe think through how do these systems play out in the art sector. So I'll give you a couple of maybe employment, wealth, and education. How do you see those inequalities playing out in the art sector? And this, I would love some responses.
For one thing, there are very few people of color in administrative positions in the arts sector, very few who are on boards, and very few who are in any kind of leadership position.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that hits all points: employment, wealth, and education. Those are definitely all intersected there.
I will say that there's also, for those that are in leadership positions or on boards, you tend to see the same subsect of minorities, and it lends to a lot of board minority fatigue. I'm speaking for myself in particular as a Latinx individual. I love contributing to boards and community organizations, but I also really want to diversify the mix of those that I serve with as well. And not just, there are sometimes I see James McKissick and I see Marcus at the same 5 things a week, and as we're all kind of circulating in the same circle, but I would love to see that be expansive.
Yeah, I as somebody that was newer to Chattanooga and observing how things are operated here, how racism is playing out, inequalities, I could probably name the same people I see on boards or leadership positions, like maybe on one hand or two. So I think that's very true. Jennifer Holder saying that there are very, very few curators of color as well.
This is Stratton Tingle. I recently heard from a good friend who is an artist, a Black person of artist out in California, who got invited to speak at a paid lecture for the University of Chicago, kind of like a big deal. But the lecture was on policy and had nothing to do with anything that she actually does in her life, which is photography, documentary, video, and it's a tokenization. She was quite upset. She just happens to be Black and someone who is intellectual, but really has nothing to do with what she was invited to speak on, which makes absolutely zero sense. It felt really disingenuous.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a story that you're going to hear across the country that happens really often.
Sarah, hey.
Business.
Oh, go ahead, Rick.
Do I have a hand up? There's a hand up.
A hand out.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Shane.
No. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, there's a lack of regular opportunities in the music business as well in Chattanooga for African Americans, and we're not represented in very many of these music festivals that are very large around our region. We're not marketed to. We're not sent stuff to come. We don't know where these festivals are going, but the lineups are all pretty much majority white. And it's pretty bad because you'll get, I guess the last time I played Riverbend was 2011. And I had a CD release party that day, that night, 2011, and it's 2020, still haven't got back. Now, I look at 2011's lineup, and then I look at all the people who have been back since. Most of them are white, and it's frustrating because that's why I have to do other things, and that's why I also have a degree, because you have to have many more avenues to be successful and be Black.
Yeah.
Sarah, we have yet to define in Chattanooga what true culture and diversity is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that especially pertaining to Latinx and African Americans, I can only speak from my opinion, but when we're asked to show up, to sit at the table, to be able to work out things, especially with I can't say certain, especially with some of our cultural institutions here in Chattanooga, we're sitting at the table, but we're not allowed to eat. Mm-hmm. So as we continue to provide content and ideas to be able to help them bring more people, in layman terms, to the yard of color, we're quickly forgotten at times that we have to continue to have conversations. And this is to me, this is a constant interaction of confusion, because when we speak out, we're told at times, okay, that's great, and then that's pretty much it. But to actively be part of a art community, that we keep saying that, you know, art's for all, define that, really define that, because I don't think that we get those opportunities to go from phase one at the table to phase two, can I put my hand on the table to pick up a piece of bread? I'm not allowed to do that in some of our arenas, you know, and we try, and I keep hearing since I've been here, we're trying, but we're at a tipping point now. We're definitely at a tipping point, and nobody wants to be used for their information, for their links, for their talents, for their gifts, to be the showcase of the day versus being part of the integrated system. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Was somebody?
Yeah, the bag.
Yeah,
I mean,
go ahead.
Cultural appropriation of arts also happens. And for an example, I went to the International Blues Contest 2 years in a row, actually, and it's in Memphis. And so we're talking about blues, and which is African American tradition music. So I go to a blues contest, and I'm a blues African American performer, and the judges are all white. And so I read the comments that they put for my set with Descartes, my friend, my bass player, and original blues content out of 1 to 10, a 2. Originality, 3. I did all original music, okay? We're talking about cultural appropriation. That's like someone telling Sarah how to cook Mexican cuisine, right? You have somebody from Germany saying, no, that is not right. That's ridiculous that these people are going to judge me on my art who don't even have a concept where this music comes from. And anti-racism, I like that that's going on, is right here with Wanderlinger put a stop to some shit, but I'm getting upset, sorry.
No, it's okay. Yeah, it's okay. I appreciate you guys sharing that. I think these are the conversations that are happening, that for us to have these conversations in a mixed setting where we have Black and people of color that are experiencing things in a room with white people, that this might be a new conversation for you, can be difficult, you know, because there's a lot of emotion on a side that is tired, that has experienced this for years in Chattanooga. And so I appreciate you guys sharing in this space. I wanted to say, Athena, African Americans are underrepresented in both art, collections, staff, and attendance to cultural institution. Black students do not have that same access to arts and resources for their counterparts. So yes, the word anti-racism might be a new word for some of you, although I've seen it a lot the past couple weeks, or week, I would say, that word being thrown out a lot. The definition for anti-racism is it goes beyond tolerating and celebrating racial diversity. It addresses racism as a system of unequal power between white and Black, Indigenous people of color. It's taking a committed stand against racism, a stand that's translated into action that interrupts and disrupts racism in all of its forms, whether personal or institutional, blatant or routine, intended or unintended. Anti-racism is active by definition. So from an anti-racist perspective, the question is not, did racism happen, but how did it happen? Or how did it happen? The assumption is that racism is always present. Even in the absence of diversity, the absence is a powerful message. So we have to take responsibility for learning and interrupting racism. So a couple of thoughts of what that looks like. It's taking action to address our own racism and prejudice, racism in others. So when your coworker's saying something busted, you say something. And absolutely in our institutions. And when I say in our institutions, I mean that's like equitable power. That's the uncomfortable conversation and action that I think a lot of people have a hard time doing. It's building relationships with Black, Latinx people of color that are based, that are long-term, that are equal, that are based on trust and commitment. So not just somebody you might work with and feel that you have a friendship with, but somebody that you are committed to long-term, that you're not holding power over. And then also following the leadership of Black, Latinx, and people of color. How many white people can say here that they are under leadership of Black, Latinx people of color? I think that's an important question to ask yourself. So I found, James and I both came across these graphics that were pretty great on Twitter the other day. So this one is inequality. It's an unequal access to opportunities. You can see this little guy on the right has very few apples that he could even get and can't reach it. Equality is evenly distributed tools and assistance. So you can see that they got the same thing, but there's still lots of barriers to getting the few opportunities that this little guy has access to. Equity is custom tools that identify and address inequality. So you can see that he's able to reach it. I would say for you to understand the custom tools that your organization or institution needs to have to create equity is going to take a lot of work, a lot of shared power, and a lot of sacrifice. And I would say looking to the leadership of Black, Latinx people of color for those custom tools to be able to point them out. Justice is fixing the system to offer equal access to both tools and opportunities. So we say that racial justice is proactive reinforcement of policy. Oh, Lord. So sorry, guys. I just got a phone call. Racial justice is proactive reinforcement of policies, practices, attitudes, and actions that produce equitable power, access, treatment, opportunities, impacts, and outcomes for all. So I hope you're understanding that these terms that sometimes get thrown around are really rooted in action. And so if there's not action and movement happening, then it's difficult to use those terms to describe yourself or even your institutions. So I want to ask another question and let people respond. What are some of the attitudes and actions in the arts sector here in Chattanooga that are a barrier to creating racial justice?
Hey, this is Krenisha Whiteside, and I kind of wanted to speak on this question and the last question, because it's not really just Chattanooga that's having this issue, but Jennifer mentioned that there's a lack of Black curators specifically, and then someone else mentioned the art world and how it has a lack of Black collectors and etc. I think people assume that people who do get into my position as a curator only want to work with Black art, and that's not true. Like, I enjoy Egyptian hieroglyphs, I enjoy 18th century art, but at the same time acknowledging my culture, I definitely love, but I think people in this sector also need to realize not to put us in a box and how we can be creative in different avenues and study different realms of the world. So yeah, that's just my thought.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I see that Monty wanted me to explain the difference between equal and equitable. So equal is when we give everybody the same thing, thinking that that's going to have an impact. And equitable is basically when you're giving something that they need. So you see that they have these specific barriers, and you're able to offer equitable tools to take away those barriers. That Monty? Explanation.
I wonder, can we just do another mute reminder right quick, please?
All right. Does anybody else have some? I know I interrupted to answer that question, but just attitudes, actions that you might see, and you're right. This is an issue happening across the country because we know that racism, this really complex system in our country, how rooted it is in it.
I would like to weigh in on that.
Mm-hmm.
This is C. Grimy. Good morning.
Good morning.
Attitudes and actions that are holding back Black arts. As a hip hop artist, with hip hop being the #1 genre of music in America, as far as like music sales and concert ticket sales, there's no specific venue that is predominantly hip hop in Chattanooga, and the attitude of a hip hop predominantly show in Chattanooga is always that something's bad's gonna happen. And I've been putting together shows for about 10 years now, and I've never had as much as the average, stuff that would go on at any show. And I just think that perception that because hip hop is predominantly African American and hip hop is, from the urban areas, that it'll bring trouble, and it's just not true. And that's it.
Yeah, thank you, C. Grimy. That really, when we're talking about our actions and our attitudes towards a group of people, this is I always like to help people think through racial narratives, and that's a racial narrative that hip hop is somehow dangerous, and we know that organizations carry those narratives, both personally and within their institutions. Shane is asking who and what keeps our arts presenters accountable to ensure that their programming and services are inclusive and diverse. Yep. Who does that? Who holds that
Sarah, because at the end of the day, I'm going to shut my mouth, because at the end of the day, we could all talk the talk and walk the walk internally. Mm-hmm. We can say that we're going to make all these fantastic changes, and the best thing that we're going to do these great collaborations. I mean, we're at a tipping point. We're at a tipping point, and it's hard for me to articulate this, especially in our current 2 pandemics that we're doing right now. But it disturbs me when I look at Rick, when I look at C. Grimy, people that I've worked with over the years, and we're still saying the same conversations. But then when we speak out and we try to say something, I in the past was told I was too aggressive to white people. So you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. But so who ensures? Who is out here saying, is it our foundations? Is it our city administration to ensure that if I give you $1, that you are truly going to make sure that your programming and services are inclusive and diverse for the whole community, not just the wolf talk. But again, that might be too aggressive for folks. We just need to talk about it, because as we continue to do these trainings, I'm so appreciative that Arts Build is even taking on the mantle of having this conversation with all these folks, 90 individuals inside this place. But at the end of the day, who is really going to ensure that we are truly trying to be inclusive and diverse in this cultural arts landscape that we have here.
Yeah.
Hey, Sarah.
Yes.
How you doing?
Good. How are you, Josiah?
I'm good. I'm so appreciative of y'all for doing this. I just want to echo everything that was said, specifically to this last question, this most recent question. And I also, like in my experience, I feel like so many, so much operation in the power structure has identified, I think, you know, how, as you've explained, when it comes to racism, a big problem in the way that that people that, especially people with privilege that don't deal with racism, the way they see it is that it happens in isolated incidents, which of course is not true, it's systematic. And in that same vein, when I feel like what's a barrier is this thinking or understanding that to solve racism, it's particularly, and to solve it or to try to create equity through the arts, what's necessary is just to create isolated solutions as opposed to having an entire systematic change and a long-term perpetual strategy to support Black artists, to support artists of color, to support the communities in which these artists work, where they come from, and to do the hard work of having the conversation and co-creating it with the creators, not trying to drop in a parachute solution or a one-time thing.
Yeah, thank you, Josiah. I appreciate that. I mean, hand claps all around. I think those are very questions that I think, like Shane's saying, you know, we're kind of at a point that there needs to be some action. And so I think the temptation, especially right now for new people that are jumping on this conversation within our country right now, you know, it's great, read a book, do the work for yourself. Those are important parts, but I think the temptation is to be able to, is going to be to stay there. Is let me just do a couple books. Let me talk to my friends about racism. But the only way that we're really going to be able to shift power is to begin to use the institutions that you are a part of, invested in, and really pushing in for change in our institutions. And that's really where you're going to start to see true change. So, you know, again, when you see that cycle of how racism is operating, we cannot stay on that one side and think that it's just an individual, I'm going to work through my own prejudice and racism. It absolutely has to include the institutional part. And it absolutely has to include our power, economics, and wealth. And so I think that is going to be the more difficult thing and more sacrificial thing, that people are not wanting to give up power or their wealth equitably. And that's just the truth. I know
Sarah,
something. Yes.
this is Charlie Newton here.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see me?
Sure.
You know, I want to echo what Josiah was saying. I'm a local artist and also director of a nonprofit, and I'm sort of like past the point of talking, and I'm also past the point of asking questions, because whatever situation we're in, and whenever institutions reach out to the community is always on the side of asking questions instead of giving solutions. And I think for the arts community, I think that we should do better than this, because we call ourselves arts partners, but we don't partner with each other. And you see, there are a lot of smaller organizations and artists in this community who are, we've been in the streets. We live on the streets, working in the community. But when you look at, say, the grants that go to a theater center or the opera, and then you look at the funds that grassroots organizations are funded, I feel like a slave. You know, we're not even getting peanuts to help us when we are already working in the community, you know, with hundreds of kids or people. And so I think that all of the systems, the Hunter Museum, the Theater Center, I think the structures need to be changed. I think the structures is not adequate. And it's obvious that the structures don't work. So I just want to echo that we need not only voices from our community, but like you intimated, we need leadership in how to change these structures. And I would like to know, I have one question. What is the Hunter Museum going to do? We don't need any more statements. You know, we've been getting statements for 400 years. You know, what will Artsville actually do? What are the new initiatives for the symphony? And that's about it. That's all I have to say.
Sarah, if I could just jump in, I would like to say thank you, Mr. Newton, for your comments, and that when I came to Artsville, that my goal was to make sure that racial equity and racial justice was part of the work and continues to be part of the work. So I see that our role is really, like you said, you're tired of talking. But I would say that for many people, this might be the first time that they've ever heard this conversation, and that their ears have ever heard how people in the community actually feel about certain issues. So what I'm committing to do is to use the power and the structures of the organization that I'm with to make sure that we do keep pushing, keep having the conversations, keep looking at the structures. And then our role is to provide assistance, training, to question, to offer solutions, and to partner. So I'm looking at this as a lot of the things that you've talked about, you know, I've experienced too as a Black person, a Black artist, an individual of color in our country. But the commitment that I have is to be a partner and to really work for social and racial justice in the arts sector. That is why we're having this conversation today. That is why Artsville has committed and made the commitment and done the work to begin making our grant making more equitable, to make sure that our leadership programs participants reflect the community that we serve, and that like the mapping project that we've done that's allowing us to really look in and look deeper at the parts of our city that we have neglected as an institution. And a lot of what we're doing, I hope that, you know, we can share that information, those findings, and those models with the community and with other institutions in the community. So I thank you. I thank everyone for their comments. And you know, we still have work to do, but this to me is hopefully a beginning, a first step, a reckoning, and a way to move forward. And I'm gonna ask turn it back over to Sarah, because I know we have like 6 minutes left. 6 minutes, Dougie Fresh. Y'all don't know about that, but anyway. We have 6 minutes to get through some very intense questions. And if we need to go longer, we will. But I hope that once we get through the pandemic, that we will be able to have these discussions and begin to do this hard work in person.
Thank you, James. Yeah, thank you for everything that you guys shared. I really appreciate. I know that this Zoom space, at least for me, sometimes feels awkward, but it's felt good to hear like just really authentic, raw comments that I think are really important to this work. So I'm going to ask some questions, hopefully for some of you that are holding power and influence, that you might think about these questions, might write them down, these questions, and kind of sit with them, sit with the discomfort, sit with the sting of it maybe, and hopefully there'll be tension enough for growth. So who are the trusted racial justice allies that you have? Do you listen to them and create environments in which they can express their authentic voices? So it's not enough that we just hear people expressing their experiences, but are you using that as a motivation for change, for true change? And do you consider them experts of their own story and their own communities? What are you doing now to advance racial equity? And what is your board doing? Your staff? Do your patrons know your racial equity goals? Are they engaged in the work? And I also want to kind of highlight, what is your board doing? I think that sometimes we can focus on a program or institution's goals, and it can include your staff. But we know that the board holds lots of power. And so what is your board doing for racial equity? How do you evaluate your racial equity work beyond numbers? How is your organization or discipline typically treated Black people or people of color who challenge the status quo? I think we heard a story of that when you do speak out, you're labeled. What is the racial narrative that you might be carrying to label somebody that's going to speak out?
Sarah, I just want to say, my name's Sarah McKeown, and I was invited to this call by a trusted ally, a trusted friend, and I feel like I've lived in Chattanooga for 5 years, and I came here from Berkeley, and so sort of like land of pie in the sky. They're so progressive, everything's so awesome, and so I kind of came with a personal mission to bring that spirit of social justice into Chattanooga. But what I've experienced throughout the past 5 years is that people are scared to engage with me. Most of the times you'll find me bartending events at the Hunter or holding alternative spaces. And I'm so fed up and I'm so angry with people labeling me as racist because I call out these institutions for racism. It's like they turn the script and they flip it on me. And so I just wanted to say, like, as someone who feels very hurt by this community, even as a white woman being told that I'm too aggressive for a woman, I'm too aggressive when I talk. I've experienced a lot of hurt and pain, but the arts community has brought me healing. Erica, C. Grimey, Arc, all these poets and writers that come in, I bring them into my students' classrooms because I want my students to see people like them. I want people to see themselves. And I just appreciate the space that you're holding. I was really hesitant to speak up, and oftentimes I ask people not to put this on recording because it scares me because of how I've been labeled and treated. I know one institution that I was part of, I had to sign a waiver that said basically I wouldn't participate in anything political while I was under contract. And that for me is so harmful because direct action is how things get done. And these protests do matter. And so again, it's not really an answer to any of these questions. I just appreciate that you are holding space. Because I think a lot of times as a white woman, I feel very insecure as to what is my role in all this. Can I really make a difference in this environment? And so I just appreciate you guys holding space for this. And I appreciate all the work that everyone's doing on the front lines.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm gonna move on to the next set of questions. How are you moving from providing diverse programming to empowering Black people and other people of color as decision makers, resource drivers, and leaders in your organization? I think that is a really powerful question to ask, especially because programming is interacting with our communities of color. And we can reinforce our racial narratives in our programming, unfortunately. And so really, do you see Black people and Latinx people as experts, resource drivers, leaders? Who are young Black and other people of color in your networks that you are grooming for leadership roles in your organization or artistic discipline? And if you don't know of people like that, then that would be a question about your networks. What does your networks look like? And how do you need to begin to change that? What can our arts community learn from the uprising for Black justice? The disproportionate impacts of COVID-19 on people of color. I live in Eastlake, and we are a hotspot in how COVID is affecting the Latinx community here. And so how's the art community coming around that? The protesting that's happening every night, and the leaders that are coming out and doing those things. How's the work outside of the walls of your organization or studio indicative of your racial justice commitment beyond the racial equity statement? And I think that's really important to think about, beyond the racial equity statement. I've seen lots of statements this past week from lots of people and organizations, nationally, locally, but we want to see action. What does that look like to bring movement there?
This is Cam Bush. You hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I would consider myself an ally and strong advocate because I truly care and I'm passionate. And I am involved in many boards, not only in Chattanooga, but national boards. And in Chattanooga, as part of AVA in the early days, I was a strong advocate for diversity in terms of the Memorial Hospital. When we have committees or councils, I have advocated for people who I know are very sharp in the African American community. And luckily we have Rick Rushing with us and Lily Wills, and Shane has been an ambassador, James McKissick involved with us. I am on a national board, which is the Sophia Institute in Charleston, South Carolina. I am on their Racial Justice Council. We have a Social Justice Racial Equity Committee. I'm involved with that. I've had a long-term experience in meeting people through that too, with presenters that we've had come in. Tanisi Coates was there with us, Marianne Williamson, all sorts of people have been with us over time. And when I am there, I try to bring back into the city, what I have learned there. Sometimes it's through conversations and sometimes it's through meetings. But, and I could go on, but my point is that I am a strong ally, and I fundraise for these various organizations. Charlie Newton with Splash, and I will continue, and I know I have many colleagues with this, but we need more and more consistency. So I would love to see us have a Racial Justice Council here, and like James said, meeting in person is going to be really important too. So I'm with you all strongly.
Thank you, Cam.
And if I just want to say, as we come to the end, we have a couple more things to share with you. But I want to thank you, Sarah, for facilitating this conversation and for the work that you do in our community. And I hope that people will reach out to you and engage you as a resource in this work. And I heard some uncomfortable things about ArtsBuild on this call and felt triggered in some ways. But what I plan to do is to really sit with it and let it sink in and figure out the ways that we can serve the community fully with racial justice as part of our mission, and how that plays into our mission and how it blooms out of ArtsBuild's mission. I've had the opportunity to visit so many organizations as I did one-on-one meetings and talked to people. And I've known and seen that this is a challenge for lots of the organizations that we serve. But what I've also seen is that people are working on it. People are acknowledging that they have racial justice and racial equity issues that they're grappling with in their organizations. And I'm a believer that we can accomplish this, and that the uprising that we're seeing in our country and in our city, that we're gonna be better as a result of it. So I want you to use me as a resource. People always tell me that one of my superpowers is the ability to get along with anyone. And as a mediator, a convener, and I'm so happy, you know, to have helped facilitate and host this conversation. This is exactly what ArtsBuild should be doing. We should be proactive. We should be responding to the things that happen in our nation and in our city, and channeling that energy throughout the arts community here in Chattanooga. And I know that some people may have felt uncomfortable on this call, and some will probably complain about it. You have my email. But we have to move forward. Our demographic is changing. The soul of our country is changing. We can no longer leave people behind. So as we move to close, I want to ask my friend Erica, if she's on the call.
Hi.
To read one of my favorite poems that always really just scrapes my soul clean. So,
can you hear me well?
Ask her to read Won't You Celebrate With Me by Lucille Clifton.
Can you hear me very well?
We can hear you.
Okay, amazing. Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model, born in Babylon.
I think we lost you, Erica. Hey, Erica, can you hear us? We lost you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. I'll start over. I'm kind of feeling it now. Oh,
I'm feeling it too.
Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day, something has tried to kill me and has failed. Won't you celebrate with me by Lucille Clifton.
All right, well, we want to thank you for joining us today. If you have feedback or comments, please share it with us. We will send you the slides along with Sarah's contact information. We've also created a Google Doc of racial equity resources that we'd like to share with you. And you can add to it. You know, this is about all of us making movement. This is about us becoming that community that we all envision. So we will see you next week on our ArtsBuild call. And I just want to say I appreciate you, and to everyone, the 80 people that are still here. Have a great weekend, and just take care, be safe and well. Thank you.
Thank you.